Adam,
Yeah?
is this an ad?
This is an ad for Mutinex. Mutinex are a marketing mix modelling company.
Why do I need one of those?
Well, then you can model the return on every single marketing decision you do.
So you wouldn't do an ad like this?
You would never have to do an ad like this ever again.
Mutinex Growth OS, your best decisions start here. For more information or to request a demo, visit mutinex.co. That's MUTINEX.co.
It's like the argument about data. A lot of people come out and say data doesn't help creativity. I totally disagree. It gives you better insights, and from those better insights, you can have more acute creative executions and creative ideas. And I think that helps. I think technology helps you too.
Brent,
Hi, Adam.
how are you? Who's today's guest? Who's sitting right next to us?
It's a little intimidating, isn't it?
Just a bit.
He's very little.
Yet also very intimidating.
It is none other than Sir Martin Sorrell.
Why have we got him on?
Goodness knows.
Why?
Well, as you know, this show's about creativity in business and its ability to transform business. And we thought it'd be interesting to talk to someone who built one of the biggest creative businesses the world has seen.
You do not give me enough credit, Brent. You remember there was a thing called Saatchi's. You remember that?
There was.
Yeah,
there was.
So I was the creative CFO of that.
You're the,
Well, the creative financial officer, not the chief financial officer.
So Martin has started.
He's not going to let us introduce him. So
No,
we might
he
as well
was
just- we might as well
at
just-
Saatchi's. He developed that up, left, created WPP. During his time at WPP, bought a whole lot of different agencies.
Yes.
Left WPP, has started S4 Capital. They acquired the Monks. So, Martin, the reason why we're flowing you out here to Australia for this interview...
I wish. I'll send you my ticket.
This may not have been explained to you before.
Okay.
But the reason why you're here is I want to pitch my agency to you.
Fine.
To see if you're going to buy it.
Well, we call it mergers now because we've changed the structure. We don't do earnouts anymore. We do half shares, half cash. The theory being that you unite ownership and control.
Okay.
That's the theory.
Right.
We have to see whether it works out.
So
can I talk to you
Sure.
about my agency?
Go
see
ahead.
if you're interested.
Give it to me. Yeah.
So it's called Thinkerbell.
Thinkerbell.
With an H.
Okay, not Tinkerbell.
No,
Okay,
and
Thinkerbell.
come on, stay with me.
Yeah.
Our proposition is measured magic, which is marketing sciences meets hardcore creativity.
Right.
We employ two types of people, thinkers
Yeah.
who think and tinkers who create.
Right.
We have brought together media planning, buying and optimization with creative, with earned to kind of be
End-to-end stuff.
I wouldn't say end-to-end stuff. I would say more of a mush of all of those skill sets
I don't like
together.
mushes.
You don't
That's
like
a negative.
mushes?
No.
All right.
The pitch has already failed.
No, I like mushes, but if you don't, then that's okay. And there's about 170 of us. We're in Sydney, Melbourne, Auckland.
Yeah.
Operating, got very good systems, processes.
Oh,
of
wonderful.
How to do stuff.
Is it good margins?
Good margin, about 20%.
Yeah, not bad.
Good growth.
Good growth.
Good top line growth.
Currently, B&T's Creative Agency of the Year.
Pas mal, as they say in France.
So here is a check.
Yes.
Now, just
What are the revenues?
well, we can talk about that later. But just if you don't mind, just write down a starting number.
Yeah, but it depends on what the revenues are and what the profit.
170 people, 20%. You can work it out.
No.
You've had experience.
Bit more.
of this.
Well, we'd have to go into a little bit more. What's the management structure there?
Unfortunately, Adam's part of it.
Oh dear. Oh, so we've added a further zero.
We've got 4 partners.
Yeah.
But there may be more.
So
Yeah.
what are you doing about 10 million US?
That doesn't matter about the revenue.
Oh no, we'd have to put a little number on it.
What? Why is that your
the
first
one
question?
word I remember from this presentation is mushy.
That's right.
So that's interesting, right? So that's your first question is about revenue rather than about the output or the.
No,
work.
that's not fair because my first question would be who are the clients?
Yep.
Okay, so which are the clients? Who are the people?
Yep.
What's the progression been over the last 3 or 4 years? Then we would go through to the inevitable, the bottom line. We mentioned 20% margins. So if it was 10 million, it will be 2 million.
That's about as much maths as Adam will be able to manage.
But we'll be.
But that's how we progress. But then, I would ask you, can we talk to one or two of your clients?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
We'd ask the trade press.
He's been a client.
Okay, well, what do you think of the agency, Brent?
Of Thinkerbell, I think they're a very interesting agency. I do think they're trying to change
the model.
some of the traditional aspects of the model. I think having media integrated is a great strength. Funnily enough, the reason I hired Thinkerbell this is my previous CMO role, was for PR. So I actually think they are able to bring highly conceptual creative thinking like we'd expect in the above line world and bring it into areas like PR.
I don't like the word PR.
No,
because
I don't. No, that's cringe.
Earned media.
PR makes me think of sort of men in dirty Macs in pubs.
Yeah, you've
smoking
bought a few PR
heavily.
agencies in your time, though.
No. Well, yes.
Earned media might be a better.
Maybe social
attention
media.
getting or fame gathering media or something.
Maybe new
influencing
media companies, because PR is blurred. I mean, PR to become a bit sexier.
How much?
Then we'd have to talk to a few people in the industry about what they think, like Brent, or maybe Brent is sufficient on his own. We want to talk to a few journalists, what they think about you, analysts, and get a full view. So I wouldn't be prepared to sign a check now, Adam. I'll come back in a few weeks. With a concerted view.
Was that your check anyway you gave someone to sign? Adam, was he signing a...
That's right. Pay. I don't think I've ever written a check before in my life, so I thought I had to write the name of the agency on the check.
Pay Thinkerbell.
As far as
so this conversation was interesting, Adam, but I think we have to explore it further.
All right.
And obviously, you have done lots and lots of deals in the past. What would be the ratio for how many you say no to once you've done all that work versus yes to, do you think, roughly?
Well, you probably say no at the beginning. So you probably, you go into due diligence. I would say probably you proceed with about 60, 70% of them.
It's quite high.
Yeah, I mean, higher the decision to go into that degree of depth. Would be, you pretty much made up your mind you'd like to do it. So it has to be a showstopper. It might be people. It might be clients. It might be what other constituencies think about it.
That's higher than I thought it would be.
Before you get to that point where you trigger your internal people or external accountants, lawyers, or whatever else, be bankers. You have to be pretty sure that you want to do it.
Yeah. You started WPP. You bought it as a shelf company, and then you
and S4 too, actually.
But with WPP, you quite famously bought J. Walter Thompson.
Yeah.
What was it about them that you thought that's going to be my start point?
Undervalued asset. So look, there are three constituencies. Coming back to your Thinkerbell thing. Clients, people inside the agency, and external constituencies. I mean, those are the shareholders. If it's a private company, it will be more complicated than that. But if it's a listed company like JWT was, that was it. And JWT had really lost traction in all three constituencies. Don Johnson, the CEO.
From Miami Vice? No.
The chairman and CEO, they had a compulsory retirement age at JWT of 60 years old, and Don Johnson was 65. And at the annual general meeting prior to us launching our hostile, as it was called, it was only hostile to one person, that was the Don Johnson. A shareholder came up to him and said, how comes you got a compulsory retirement age of 60 and you're 65? He said, it doesn't apply to me. And the other funny thing about Don Johnson is this was really interesting. On his desk, he had a Marine helmet, right? A U.S. Marine helmet. And it transpired that he had never been in the Marines.
Oh, God.
It was a sort of bogus story, which we dug out. So he'd lost, and he fired Burt Manning, who was the head of, I think, of North America for J. Walter Thompson, who was really his successor. And of course, we brought Burt back, unbeknownst to them. I mean, I had a arrangement with Bert that if we were successful on the hostile, I would bring him back to run. So Johnson obviously left because when we took over the company, and we brought Bert back, and that was a good move. Jim Patterson, now one of the world's most famous authors, was the creative director of JWT in New York. And the funniest thing was Bert, who worked 24/7. Always used to say to me, he said, "Why does Jim get up at 4:30 in the morning to write books? He should be getting up in the morning to write, to do ads."
Yeah, good.
And now the answer's obvious.
Yes.
But coming back to, because it's interesting when we were thinking about, this show's about creativity.
Yeah.
And it feels to us
Creativity in all its forms.
Correct. And
Right.
it felt to us the way that you sort of set up WPP, the way you managed to leverage to buy JWT in a hostile, that feels like a creative act to us.
Yeah.
It felt like you. So tell us more.
Not to many people in the industry. It's purgatory to the industry,
But it
or
was
heresy.
But
Well,
the
you
way
haven't-
you structured it, pulled it off was quite
let
creative,
me
right?
just lay it out. Right. All those creative people are very financially driven. And it may be, to your point, that creativity spans all sorts of things. It's not just creative in the sense of creating ads
Yeah.
and producing ads and distributing them, but also in the way you go about it. But the very interesting point is all those creative gods and goddesses actually were very focused on financial gain. They dressed it up often as not, they had no interest whatsoever in the financial, but, Chiat Day, Wyden and Kennedy, are very successful businesses financially. I think there's a little bit of, dare I say it, hypocrisy.
Do you like it when the creatives become the CEO?
I think that's a really interesting point. I think creative CEOs are far more effective, or creative in the sense of the image. So Bert Manning, right?
Yep.
Classic example. Yes.
Crispin Porter
The
used to do it for all of their...
clients love to talk to creative CEOs because if they're not creative, they're suits, right? They can often be blockers. But that was Bert's, using him as an example from a long time ago. That was his greatest skill and asset, and that was either by accident or design the most effective thing we did in the context of JWT. That was the real unlock there, and you're absolutely right. So was David Ogilvy a creative or was he a suit? I would argue he was both. But he was a leader who had that creative capability. I came into contact with him. I'd never met him, and he wrote that. He called me an odious little shit. In those days, the Financial Times wouldn't print the word shit. They put odious little jerk. So it was OLJ rather than OLS. But we used to put cartoons on the back of our annual report and put me as OLS, an OLJ. But David was a really interesting example because he was a mixture of an acute businessman. He didn't profess to be one, but he was a really interesting guy. He started his agency at the age of 40. He was an Aga cooker salesman. He worked at Gallup. He understood the importance of research, market research.
Yep.
And then the other thing, we were talking about it in relation to AI here in Australia this week. He understands personalized marketing at scale, or hyper-personalized marketing at scale. One of the things that I think is the most interesting thing that's going on at the moment. You may disagree, but he understood the power of one-to-one marketing. In his context, it was direct mail.
Why do you think we would disagree?
Thinkerbell, you said, was a mixture of creativity and technology. You sort of present this as creative. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's more balanced. But creativity being key, a lot of people look at the role of tech and the importance of tech as crushing creativity. I don't think it does. I think it enhances. It's like the argument about data. A lot of people come out and say data doesn't help creativity. I totally disagree. It gives you better insights, and from those better insights, you can have more acute creative executions and creative ideas. And I think that helps. I think technology helps you too.
Is there a particular example that you talk to when you're trying to make that point?
Example currently?
Yeah,
Yeah, GM.
months.
GM turning their marketing upside down. I think what they're doing is revolutionary. And what's really interesting about it is it's being done at a time when GM is doing very well from a profitability point of view. I think they made $3 billion in Q1, $4 billion in Q2. I mean, they acknowledge that, in China, for example, it's much tougher. But, usually the argument inside a company is if it ain't broke, we don't have to fix it. This is a case where it isn't broke. The results are extremely good. They're changing the model. They've inverted the model. 4 independent small creative agencies for the 4 brands: GMC, Buick, Chevrolet, Cadillac. They had the holding companies, IPG and Publicis, in there managing those brands. Now you have 4 CMOs for that. Group CMO Norm, who comes from CVS, new CEO from before. So you've got the 4 creative agencies creating the big idea, and we're the transformational agency underpinning all that, where we take the big ideas, we create, produce, and distribute content at scale. It's complicated in the auto industry by the fact that some of the auto manufacturers are going direct increasingly. So, for example, BMW in Europe has gone direct through Mini this year in several countries, and next year BMW will go direct. So the factory for the first time is going to sell cars to the consumer. Never sold a car before, never had control of the data before, right?
Yeah, direct to consumer.
So dealers become, they're not selling cars and getting commissions.
Yeah.
They're doing the servicing.
Yeah, right.
So totally different model. So I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So I would say that's the best example. I think in every conversation I've had with CMOs and my colleagues have had, there is not one CEO who has refused to have a conversation to examine that, because it's, I think it's transformational and very, you've changed your own marketing approach.
Similar model. It's very interesting to hear you talk about the GM model, where you've got independent agencies, sort of creatively leading, so to speak, but then you've built a sort of system.
I call it the content factory. But
And so I did a similar thing with my agency model at Telstra, where we've got a small independent agency,
right,
a bit like Adams, an independent agency called Bear Meets Eagle on Fire, and they are absolutely providing the creative vision, but the TWA network has built a system around them which enables them to manage a client and an ecosystem as big as ours, which is hard for some independents.
Which is huge.
But it's interesting, right? Because I do think this is a trend. Indies are on the rise.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of great creative talent leave the holding companies and leave the big network agencies and go and start their own agencies.
When you say that, Brent, is that Australia or is that globally?
I feel certainly Australia and America.
Australia is different.
Well, an independent agency won the Agency of the Year at Cannes for the first time, which is Gut, and they're sold. But so
Gut,
it does.
Well, they're not sold completely. They're 51% sold to Global. What was interesting about Gut, they lost their biggest client.
Hang on, before we go into Gut, why did you say that when he's talking about GM? Why did you say 4 independent agencies? Why did you mention the word independent when you're talking about? Well, then
agencies? Actually, to be fair, 2 of them are inside Stagwell. Anomaly and 72 and Sunny in their mother, and I can't remember the 4th agency, but they're 2 fully independent, if you like, and 1 quasi or 2 quasi,
but not big networks.
No, because Norm believes that the independents. I think he believes that the independents provide, or smaller agencies, that there are not economies of scale and creativity, I guess is one way of putting it. So big does not necessarily mean best. It might in media, but it doesn't in creative.
That's an interesting negative way to talk about it in a funny kind of way.
Well, you also, right at the top, you said you were the creative financial officer at Saatchi Saatchi, because the Saatchi motto was the opposite.
Nothing is impossible.
Nothing's possible, but also it's good to be big. I can't remember the exact words. It's good to be big, better to be good, but best to be big and good. Something like that. I'm making a mess. But the idea that Saatchi could be big and good.
Yeah, well, we were very ambitious. We were young, impressionable.
Yeah.
Nothing was impossible. Charlie and Morris were great sort of visionary leaders. Charlie was in at 10, played chess all day, did one or two creative campaigns, brought his dog Lulu in with him, mimicked his personal assistant on when he talked to editors of creative magazines or he wanted to get a headlining campaign. He would say, "I'm Simon Mellor," when he was talking to Bernard Barnett, who was editor of Campaign. So got up to all sorts of tricks. And Morris was the suit, but Morris was unbelievably good at putting financial analysis down on a piece of paper. His charts for I always remember this. His charts that he personally designed for P&Ls, accounts receivable. I mean, it's weird, and work in progress were actually extremely good.
So the way he would visualize,
yes, he would visualize,
data.
conceptualize how you would lay out. For idiots, right, like me and others, how you would lay out how financial progress in a very simple schematic way were brilliant.
Wow.
Really good. I mean, he actually created the paperwork system. And Michael Green and David Green, who were running Carlton Television at that time, I remember Michael, we always used to come into my office and peer over my desk to look at these, the way we looked at it, because it was actually extremely well done.
Wow.
But that is somebody who's taking creativity right through
in a different
right
area.
through the business.
Yeah.
And so to have beautifully creative and simple to read financial
simplicity
charts,
being
you meant
that,
brutal simplicity of
brutal
thought is-
simplicity.
yeah.
So
Well,
they
other
didn't
one.
express it that way then, but it was
already there.
thing.
No, it's interesting because you made the point earlier around data, and I do think, we are drowning in data. Right? Data. But yet the way we visualize it, the ability to tell a story with it,
Unbelievable.
so many people don't have that skill and can't do that,
And they don't
it makes such a
understand
difference,
it.
right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have to do that because, as you well know, with deprecation of third-party cookies, although it's off and on, and off, but we still have to do, because that's the major source. Plus, the signals from the platforms are critically important. But you're dead right. I mean, visualizing it in an appealing way, particularly because of the nature of the people that we deal with. In our organization now, we have people who are content creators, producers, and distributors. We have data and analytics people. We have digital media planning and buyers. And then we have digital transformation people. If I looked at the content people, they're less process driven. The data people tend to be more process driven. And the tech service business are super process driven. That's why when I think of a David Droga inside Accenture, it's a little bit odd in a way, because you're marrying all those things. And the content side of the business doesn't take process lightly. That's why coming back to what Morris designed was really interesting, because it was a very simple way of explaining to anybody, including those people, the way it worked.
Or is Droga just the new incarnation of the David Ogilvy, the creative businessman who started as a creative and then is now running a company?
I sort of think that you've had him on this program, that David's skills, which are considerable, would be better, in my view, 100% applied in different ways. I don't think his skill necessarily is in consolidating, one acquisition a week or whatever it is that Accenture does. Interestingly, Accenture never breaks out in its results acquisitions, inorganic growth from organic. It's just one number, so you never know how much of the growth is the thing. So I think Julie Sweet made the right decision. It was Brian Whipple, wasn't it?
It was previously.
And they moved David in to replace, and I think that was a good move, and that was a smart move. But I don't think, just talking of somebody who's fiddled around at smaller scale, I think David would be better focused on what we all know his skills are rather than trying. So I'm not sure I agree with that.
Maybe he needs to get better at the mushing.
Put him back in Thinkerbell.
Doesn't quite have the mush.
He's the CEO. So we buy the agency and put David in as the CEO of Thinkerbell. So I think that, anyway, that would be my view for what it's worth. David Ogilvy was not a financial guy. He was a great mixture of suit, great client man, presenter, winner of business, builder of relationships, and creative as well. I
That
mean, he appreciated the creative.
Maybe what you're saying is back in the day when things are simpler, you could put things together a bit more, the business and
Well,
the
in those
creative.
days, it was all integrated.
And now what you're saying is if you want to be a creative hotshop, it's very hard to do that at scale. If you want to do mass personalization through tech at scale, you can do that. But it's hard to do. There's a divide in how you're seeing the world. Is that right?
No, I don't think it's. I think you have to integrate it now. I mean, the interesting thing about technology and data is that you can do it now at smaller scale. So coming back to what Brent said about let's call it the rise of independence. I mean, our dinner on Monday night, one of the representatives of the tech platform says the independents in Australia are outgunning the holdcos. Whether that's right, I think that is probably.
I think it's
probably,
right.
Probably right.
Yeah, it's right.
That may not necessarily be the case everywhere in the world, but I think technology and the rise of data gives the independent more wiggle room. So you can do what you did at Telstra, and you can do what they're doing at General Motors. You can do what they're doing at BMW. You can do what they're doing at SC Johnson. You can do what they're doing at Pepsi. You can do what we did with Google Hatch and what we did with Meta and Forever 21 at significant scale, although, we're only 7,500 people, right? And Accenture is 750,000 people?
It's a lot. It's a lot. But I think the really interesting point is the Indies couldn't do it alone. They needed you to come in and build a delivery system.
Well,
you know what I mean?
And we haven't
we
haven't built strong enough systems yet. But the companies that we brought together in S4 and Monks were small to medium-sized companies. And the owners of those companies wanted bigger client exposure, bigger geographical exposure, bigger capability exposure. They felt limited. They'd done very well and built it. Getting to the nub of it, bringing those companies together is not easy. We have 4 basic principles. Digital only, because we think that's where the growth is. Data driven, because we think that's what, with AI, it's become super important. Go to market is faster, better, cheaper, and because of AI, we've tacked on and more because we can do more at scale, and a unitary P&L. This is not the multiple agency model, which I think is a busted flush. Power of one at Publicis. Why is Publicis outgunning all the other 5 major holding companies?
French accents?
Maybe, peut-être. And Havas, I mean, to your point,
the same thing. And Havas, they're all
yes, I think Havas will be a comer. I think Havas had done a deal with Uncommon. You had Niels landed on this, and I think when it becomes separated from Vivendi, I mean, it will be a force. I think Yannick Bolloré is probably a mini Artur Sadoun. Getting to the nub, I think Publicis have developed a one Publicis much more effectively. I mean, you use Omnicom. Can be very direct. I don't think John Wren has a strategic bone in his body, to put it mildly, but it works. He has super good people, maybe a bit traditional, but they're super good, and they've continuously delivered over 33, 35 years, whatever it is that they've been in existence. So they've done super well. They have very strong storied brands, BBDO and TBWA and China, so super good, DDB, super good. But I think they haven't got the strategy that Publicis have. And the third one I put in Division 1 would be Havas. Division 2, which is struggling a minute, is WPP, and IPG, and Dentsu. And Dentsu here in Australia, I mean, I was shocked to be told that Dentsu have lost more money in Australia than they invested in Australia. In the media business that Harold built is a shadow of its former self.
Harold Mitchell, indeed.
Yeah.
How do you feel about WPP being in the 2nd division now?
Oh, obviously, when you create a business, I don't know whether you founded a business.
I haven't. Adam has. He's got that on me.
Well, Adam knows it.
I haven't.
It's like having a baby. I mean, for a man. Therefore, you have an emotional attachment. You have, there's an umbilical cord that probably never gets cut. So this morning I read that they're going to sell, the classic pre-announcement announcement to the Financial Times, that KKR are going to buy FSG, the Those were 3 PR companies that we put together when I was there,
Mm.
more loosely than they are now. And I think that's rather sad, because I think it's a great asset. And actually, it's described in the Financial Times as being non-core. That's rubbish. It is core.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the financial relationship, coming back to your comment about PR,
Yeah.
that sort of, what do you call it, PR or social media, that is really strategic,
Well,
right?
yes.
You deal, when you do financial advice, who do you give it to? You give it to the CEO,
Yeah.
the chairman,
Yep.
and the CFO.
And absolutely, and crisis and
Absolutely
all that stuff.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That is super core.
Mm.
And they're selling a
Mm.
super core business. They describe it a non-core because that's a good giveaway,
Mm.
right?
And-
Getting a good price to KKR.
Private equity, right?
If it's a good deal for WPP, it's a bad deal for KKR. I'll bet it's the other way around. Henry Kravitz is no fool.
Adam,
Yeah?
is this an ad?
This is an ad for Mutinex. Mutinex are a marketing mix modelling company.
Why do I need one of those?
Well, then you can model the return on every single marketing decision you do.
So you wouldn't do an ad like this?
You would never have to do an ad like this ever again.
Mutinex Growth OS, your best decisions start here. For more information or to request a demo, visit mutinex.co. That's mutinex.co.
When you're acquiring agencies in a holding company,
Yeah.
how important is it that you're trying to get different creative outputs, or kind of trying to find different pieces in the pie to put together to create a greater whole? Or are you just looking at every single thing individually as an opportunity, or as a financial opportunity in and of itself? Or are you trying to create an ecosystem that works together?
Look, let me just back up a minute. And say something I feel very strongly about. Good people are good by definition. Good people who are good and share are the real jewels.
Mm.
The problem is, in most organizations, people put their arms around things. And what you want is people to embrace other people, to put it as succinctly as I possibly can. Those are the real jewels. Now, we have several of those people inside S4 Monks. We had several of those people inside WPP, but the rule tends to be with good people that they have sharp elbows. And I think one of the things that AI might do, and we should get into this, because information is power, and the way that people maintain silos and political differences with a small p is through control of information. With AI, nobody will have control. It will be available to the whole organization. That's why Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, I'm told, has 51 direct reports, which confounds all McKinsey management theory, which would be about 12 or 13 people. He doesn't do one-to-one meetings, or as many, and he sets people 5 objectives, and then he progress chases them on his iPhone or whatever until they're done. It tells you the organization is going to be flattened. The problem is, if I was going to write a book on my life as an advertising agent, I would say the biggest issue is politics with a small p. It's the political stuff, it's the institutional stuff, it's the organizational stuff that stops things from happening, both on the client side and on the agency side. So creating one organization is critically important. And there's a great article by McKinsey recently, and it's in typical McKinsey style. They came out with a number that they said that unitary brands, I think, were 24% more effective and productive than organizations that were multiple brands. Now, Bernard Arnault at LVMH disproves that theory. He has 73 maisons, so he's run brilliantly separate brands. But I think bringing them together in an effective way as well. So coming back to your question about creative, it is created differentiation, but I'm going to say something you probably really won't like. I think the media side of the business, for good or evil, has become the primary driver. If I look at WPP, we created initially with Mindshare, then with Wavemaker and Mediacom and Essence Mediacom now, a $60 billion machine. Okay, that has huge clout. That is, all those 6 holding companies, without exception, including Havas, but on a smaller scale, are driven really by the strength of the media business. And when you think about the media investment, that's 60 billion. So WPP's revenues, I think, now are about 14 billion, right? But they have a media book of 60 billion, which still makes them the biggest. I mean, Publicis is catching up at around 50 or 55, but it makes them the one or two top media buyer for a Murdoch or a Google or a Meta or a Disney or whatever it happens to be. Super, super important, and super important from a client point of view.
Yeah.
That's, by the way, I can't understand why. I know that the monkeys here in Australia have hired, 3 media people from IPG. It's going to be very interesting to see what they do and what the reason for it. But I can't understand why Accenture hasn't bought Group M or something like it, because that gives them huge clout.
It feels like those 3 people are put in place to buy a independent
Maybe.
media
Maybe.
agency.
Well, we'll see.
But just so what's interesting about that so you want to keep the clout, understand
Yes,
the
and
importance
then
of
the
that.
creative is the answer is, I think you have different creative styles. I mean, the creative styles are driven by individuals, right? So you have very strong. So, for example, at Grey, which was always, when we acquired Grey from Ed Meyer, in 2004 or whenever it was, that was a super good deal. And the reason it was super good is that, Ed ran it in a pretty idiosyncratic way. We brought Jim and Tor Myron in. I mean, I think one of the worst days that I had was when Tor told us that he was going to go to Apple. He's
done very well there.
And he's done brilliantly. And it was the right thing for him. It wasn't the right thing for us. And I don't think Grey, to be frank, was ever the same again. I mean, Neil's was a mini Tor, but Tor was the key, and was a super good creative, outstanding, as he's proven at Apple, as you say. So you have somebody like that you bring into an organization, which appears on the outside, Grey by name, Grey by nature. Clients like P&G, like Eli Lilly, whatever, very package goods driven, very network driven. But Jim and Tor really changed the way. And Jim came from McCann. Ed was the one who forced Jim down my throat. I thought he was a little bit too traditional as a suit or as a client guy, but the two together were fantastic.
I was in New York at the time and had the misfortune of pitching against them.
No,
they were formidable.
Really effective.
So
they were an effective machine.
So the creative differences by the brands is just down to amazing individuals who happen to rock up at those places.
Exactly.
So there's nothing systemically different about the creative output of one of those large.
No, it's driven by the individual creative spark, in my view. It's like you're going back to Thinkerbell. Whoever the creative director of Thinkerbell is, that's going to be key, or creative directors, or creative department.
Jumping back to what you said about media now in control, for good, better or worse. 2 questions on that. Why then have you dropped the name media from?
Because
Monks?
it made us look too narrow. 2 reasons. One, it harked back to Media Monks in Holland as a production shop, and people would be dismissive of us on the basis, they're just a production shop. That's they just produce commercials and distribute them. So that was one thing, and we do more than that. I explained we do content creation, production, and distribution. Yes, we do data and analytics and digital media. Yes, and we do digital transformation. And the people in digital transformation, to be very blunt, felt, when they walked in a room and said we're part of Media Monks, it doesn't really signify Monks. So somebody at the Monks said to me, well, you can, you take the Monks and you just, you just add EY.
Monkey.
There you are.
And then why don't you just drop your own creative hot shops into that platform?
Well, it's a really good question, right? So if you think about the GM model, you have the 4 upper funnel creative directors. You have your upper funnel creative agency, and then you have the execution, right? And we're doing the transformational. So it's a very good question. So I think
starting to get written.
No. I think the world. Well, no, that's fair comment. And I think the world has changed, and you may not agree with this. I think consumers and companies have become much short term. They've become more fickle. You may then argue, well, let's make them unfickle, whatever the right way of putting it is. But I think they're much more short-term, much more mid-funnel and lower funnel, to use that jargon, rather than upper funnel. I always remember talking to the CMO of a major financial company that we worked for. A new CEO had just come in, and the CEO said to the CMO, "Why are we doing all this upper funnel stuff? Right? We're doing spending hundreds of millions up here on all various sponsorship and everything. I have to go in front of institutional investors every quarter, and I have to sell them what I've done on the revenue side, what our margins are. And then private equity, what's their hold period? 4 or 5 years. And then they're out. So that's the period of time a president or prime minister or a CEO lasts for 4 or 5 years on average. A CMO lasts for
Even
18
less.
months, or 2 years, whatever
less.
it is. So what it is.
Yeah.
How long have you been about, sir?
18 months.
How long were you at ING
Oh, dear.
for? 3 years?
ING was nearly 6 years.
Oh, wow.
I'll have you know, Adam.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
You boosted the average. But there is an argument, right? My own view is I'd agree with you that we have to move up the funnel. We have to strategically and creatively to be even stronger. So I don't disagree with it.
And would you see that as a fifth pillar to what you're doing?
No,
or would you see
no,
that as embedded into all of it?
It's above it.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it comes back to what we were saying about flogging off FSG. That's really interesting to me because I saw the opportunity with F, S, and G. Well, it wasn't. They've added since I was there. But in the 3 companies that we had, Robinson, Lear and Montgomery, and the UK agency and the German agency, I saw the opportunity there because we were locked into senior management. And the biggest problem for agencies is getting into the boardroom.
Getting past the CMO, yeah.
Somebody asked the
Yeah.
question
Well,
here. How many
no,
CMOs become
CMO
CEOs?
We argue
a
about
lot.
this.
The CMOs are on the rise,
so we
and they're
argue.
joining boards. It's happening.
We
But-
argue about this.
But to your point about PR, what I love about it is it's got the ear of the CEO,
Exactly.
and then, but it's
Exactly.
really executional as well,
Exactly.
and it's amazing. And then, but they I think they've made a mistake by calling that Stratcoms. So so the brand of PR is still down here,
Yeah.
even though it's incredibly strategic. But we have to move on to S4.
Yeah.
We've spoken a lot about it. What we've done, we do a thing here every
Oh dear, this is
thing.
the
This is the
pub test.
This is
the
the pub
reveal,
test.
the pub test.
Now, what we've done is we've put S4 to the pub test, and we've asked a bunch of marketers if they'll be interested in acquiring S4's services. What we gave them to see if they'd be interested is the copy on the website. I'm just going to read this out for our listeners now, and it might make you cringe or you might love it and burst with pride. I'm not sure. So this is S4. A purely digital advertising and marketing services business which disrupts analog models by embracing content, data and digital media and technology service in an always-on 24/7 environment for global, multinational, regional and local clients and for millennial-driven influencer brands.
It's quite a lot there. I don't think Morris Saatchi would have written it.
I reckon,
quite so.
and I reckon that might be one sentence. But anyway, so we've asked some marketers what they think and does it pass the pub test or not. Let's have a listen.
Okay.
The pub test is brought to you by Ideally, the online research platform that's better than a pub test.
If you want to do a pub test on your own, don't. Go to Ideally instead.
It's like a pub test, except it's really a test.
Well, I'm looking for an agency kind of like that. Bits of that are definitely what I would want. But I think there are some bits missing from that agency too, like how to build my brand, how to actually understand my customer, and how to actually know how to have long-term conversations with them.
I've got more pressure on me ever to deliver a return on investment, and that's what I'm KPI'd against. And so I need to put my spend into channels that I can trust I'm going to get a result from and prove it. This kind of sounds like something I'm into.
I'm not really looking for an agency quite like that. I believe my brand is about the immersive experience. I want people to experience the brand.
Do we need pure digital agencies anymore? Not really, but every agency should be somewhat purely digital.
Would have been a weird question like 5 years ago, but now it seems really relevant again.
A purely digital advertising and marketing service which aims at a multinational global scale isn't for me. I'm really looking for more localization.
Does this sound like a new holding company? No, but it definitely sounds like what advertising industry might need if you asked AI to write me a description of an agency that would be the future-focused version of itself.
Sounds like an old holding company. Sounds like something from like the 2000s. But then again, it also sounds like something that could be really relevant next year when we're all living in our little VR AI world.
Does it pass the pub test? I'm going to say yes in a weird way, because if you're drunk at the pub and you say that to most people, they'd probably go, yeah, of course, that's what everyone's doing, digital marketing and online 24/7 content, etc. But if they thought about it any further outside the pub, they'd probably realise it's not quite giving you what you really need.
If passing the pub test means that the average Joe would think this is a great idea for a marketing agency, I would say sure. But it doesn't appeal to me because marketing and the advertising agencies that I'm looking for aren't necessarily a one-size-fits-all option.
No, it sounds like placeholder text that an intern had to write for a website when they were getting it off the ground. Or maybe it's just got to mean something to absolutely everyone. So it just says absolutely everything in it, but it doesn't really have much personality, and it doesn't really pass the test.
Well, some said yes and some said no.
Yeah, I reckon,
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good pub
About
test.
50-50.
Yeah.
Well, if they're drunk in the pub, it passes the test.
Well,
once they
sober up,
yeah,
you've already made the deal, so it doesn't really matter.
We
I
touched
can't say
some nerves, though. Some nerves.
I thought the very first comment out of the gate was the most interesting on that, where they said, "Well, where's brand building?" And
Well, I do. It's what I said before.
yeah,
I think we have been more executional, but I think whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, I think that's the way the world is going.
yeah,
So I think it is much more short term. I think you may disagree, Brent, because your consumers here in Australia and elsewhere very, very well. But I think they have become more fickle, more volatile, and I think they reflect what's going on in the world. I spent 40 years or whatever it is at Saatchi's and WPP and now at S4, and I think we've been very fortunate to live through a relatively peaceful, more global world where we've all benefited from that, and I think we're now going to go into an era where it's going to be much more fractured.
I have to think that brands can be a bit of an antidote to that in some ways, in terms of a shortcut through complexity, in terms of like in a world where I don't know who to trust, I can trust brands. I don't know. I need to be optimistic.
Well, that's going to
like
become
a Coke machine
I need to
in
be
Kashmir
optimistic.
on the border.
You know why I like Ideally, Adam?
Why, Brent?
It's fast. You get insights overnight. And I think the main thing is it's not trying to test whether an idea should live or die, but it's trying to give you real insights that you can build on and make the creative better.
That sounded like an ad.
Because it was.
Do you know why I like Ideally?
Why?
Because they sponsor the black T-shirts.
They do.
If you want to do a pub test on your own, don't. Go to Ideally instead.
That's right. Visit geoideally.com. That's goideally.com and find out how they can help.
What I found really interesting about you is you're really into big kind of issues. When we sat down, he started talking about the geopolitical relationships between China and America.
I think they're so important for the people
that's where
that
your head goes, right?
Yeah.
You have got so many resources available to you through your network of agencies and your influence and so forth. How much of your time do you think about trying to put it against really big global problems and try to solve
the reason
those?
I think that's important is I think that's what drives, going back to what we said about the boardroom, if you like, or the chairman, CEOs, etc. That's of global companies, not so much of local, but local affected by it as well, and regional are certainly affected by it. That's what makes them tick. That's what makes them do things or not do things, right? If there's greater volatility in the world, there's greater hesitation. We had a client dinner here last night and Monday night, and one of the things I take away is the volatility that we're going through politically, whether it's US, China, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, whether it's Iran and Israel, North Korea, Venezuela, Bangladesh, the riots in the UK, whatever it is, that creates uncertainty. That creates indecision. If you're a CEO for 5 years, You don't want to take risks. It's the worst thing in the world that you can do is to take risks. We may disagree with it, but that's the fact of life. So understand that's critical. If you said to me, what is the biggest issue for US CEOs, where most of the global companies that we deal with are located? Sure, they're worried about the geopolitical stuff. Sure, they're worried about climate change. Sure, they're worried about sustainability. Sure, they're worried about AI. But the biggest thing is regulation and taxes. That's why Trump, for good or bad, has traction.
Yeah.
And when Trump went to the Hill for the first time since January the 6th, since the uprisings in America, when he went to the Hill, what did he do? He said, I'm going to lower taxes. I'm going to deal with regulation.
No
and
taxes on tits.
Biden, the following week, said exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So understanding these things are really important because that's what drives the companies that we deal with. Take Telstra as an example. That then funnels to Brent as CMO of Telstra, etc. And so understanding that, I think, is critically important. And by the way, agencies always deal at too low a level, in my view. It's this thing about why is not CMO, not CEO, right? The natural choice internally is the CFO, right?
Happens all the time.
Right.
Yep.
And then there's this great discussion about, we have to go to the CFO because the CFO thinks it's a cost. What we do is a cost, not an investment. Brian Weiser, who used to be at WPP, he has a weekly newsletter. I'm trying to increase his subscription base. And he does an analysis, really good, every quarter of what CEOs and CFOs, and by the way, CMOs are very rarely on earnings calls. I can't remember a CMO who's front and center, even for a big packaged goods company where it's absolutely critical. It's always the CEO who says, I've maintained my spending or I've increased it, because, if he dings it, stock's down, right? Well, I regard it as being an investment, not a cost. CFOs say the same thing. We increased our marketing spend this quarter by X, or we maintained it, and we wouldn't reduce it at all. And then you talk to the agencies or the people that deal with those clients, it's not the case. So what they present and the reality is two different things. And I think that's a critical issue. Because today, with all this uncertainty, companies are doing pretty well. The earnings season we just gone through, I think Goldman said earnings were going to go up by 9% for the S&P 500, and I think they delivered with 75% of the companies reporting 11%. So they've done better than people say. And that's generally the case. You outperform the expectations because you always keep the expectations a little bit lower. You try to. But, if you deal with these companies, they're indecisive at the moment. They tend to delay decisions in the digital transformation part of our business. And you see this at Accenture, you see this at Globant, you see that at EPAM, Endava, ThoughtWorks, all those companies. There's delay. Why? Because of all the uncertainty. So I think understanding this stuff is critically important.
Yeah.
And is there a tension there where you say agencies tend to operate too low? They're not up with the CEO. You're talking about really big,
big and
issues,
small.
which is
Well,
great.
you're right, because entrepreneur-led companies, often the CEO is the brand officer.
That's true too.
Yeah.
And yet, you also talked earlier about your company has sort of been more lower funnel and less up there on the bigger. So
and we have to move up.
There's a tension there. There's a tension there, right?
I think, because I do think that's important. We deal with, let's say, organizations that are heavily involved in sponsorship, for example, which is very sort of upper funnel work, expensive.
Hard to prove ROI.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, often it's, F1 sponsorship because the CEO is a petrol head. Okay. So it overcomes the logical or financial argument. No, but I do think, you need to do both. Okay. So coming back to that model we discussed that you've implemented and we talked about in the context of GM.
Yeah.
That's an upper funnel model.
Yeah.
And a mid and lower funnel model. And we're doing mid and lower funnel, and I want to do that stuff up there as well. So that's where Thinkerbell comes in.
Yeah, it's kind of...
See, that's where the Thinkerbell purchase...
We always come back to Thinkerbell.
But just on this whole, you've got the same approach to geopolitical kind of issues as well. So if you think about those as kind of having upper funnel solutions, talking about tax and regulation as a way to solve all of that is kind of really lower funnel executional
Yeah,
thinking.
but if you take that geopolitical claptrap for a minute, and then you try and say, well, okay, what are the lessons? 2 lessons. One is you got to pick your geographies, right? So, when I was at, in April of 1983, I was reading the Harvard Business Review, and there was this article about globalization. Consumers are going to consume. Ted Levitt, marketing professor, nobody remembers who he was anymore, which is very sad. Over-egg the pudding to make the argument. And it was consumers are going to consume everything the same way everywhere. And I went around to Morris's office and said, Eureka, right? This is it. And Charlie and Morris based Saatchi's approach to globalize on that article, basically. So Saatchi's was about globalization. WPP was about continuation of globalization and the rise of tech in our industry. And S4 is about globalization too, in a sense, but really not so much. It's really front and center on tech. Okay? If you think about it, so there are 2 things come out. One is geographical fragmentation.
Yep.
So to pick your things. So it's not globalization. It's not deglobalization, but sort of de-risking, if you like. And the second thing is that I didn't mention Europe. Europe is big. UK, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, big economies, but there's no growth. Every client I speak to looks at Europe through the lens of cost reduction and efficiency. So AI, blockchain, quantum computing, metaverse, the much maligned metaverse, are all going to be important in doing more for less, which is not only a European thing, because the world is not going to grow as fast as it used to. Inflation is going to be higher. Here in Australia, you have 4% inflation, and interest rates not coming down.
No.
And it's going to be stickier, and interest rates are going to be higher. In that world, which is different to what we've just gone through for the last 40, 50 years, efficiency is going to be really important. So 2 things come out of all that geopolitical claptrap. One is pick your markets, and 2 is tech and efficiency becomes super important. So I think that's what you strain, and that's the lessons for our business. So we have to pick where we're going to be. We're in 34 countries. We've just opened up in Indonesia. We don't have to be in 113 countries like we were, 106, whatever it was at WPP. Tech enables you to hub more effectively. And so it's a much more focused organization. It doesn't have to have 100,000 people either. I think, the motor torpedo boat is better than the aircraft carrier. The drones are better.
As we're learning in Ukraine.
A million drones is better than one big aircraft carrier. So, Martin, I don't know if this is an insult. We can cut it out if we want.
You can.
But I think you might be the best little thinker I've ever come across. Like, everyone's focusing on the big picture. Your brain seems to focus on the little bits and scale up.
Maybe the bits that you can act, because the problem with the big problems is where do you start? And I think you're able to go, well, actually, it's this bit. If we can control that bit and make a difference there, then maybe we can impact it.
I think you've got to look at it both ways. It's the detail. What do you say? Retail is detail. Right? So it's a bit like the retail bit. My father was a retailer. So. Right.
Very quickly, before we wrap up, so Martin, personal brand. You are intimidating. You've got a big brand.
Am I intimidating?
Nah,
I'm a little
let's just assume you are. And you are
I'm a bean counter.
And you are Sir Martin Sorrell. Tell us about the Sir. What's involved in getting a Sir? Did you make that happen, or is that something that just happens?
No. It's a really interesting question, because people now employ consultants to try and get them on us.
That's right.
Unbelievable.
Right.
So I know I was sitting there twiddling my thumbs, and I got my communication. I think it was a telegram I got saying, would I consider a knighthood if it was under the Blair government. It was the Millennium List for 2000, and it was Blair was the Prime Minister. I always think Labour was probably, they would give me a knighthood. Whether the Conservatives would have given me a knighthood or not, it was for services to the industry, which I think choked up a number of people. So anyway, and then you're not meant to tell anybody, because if it leaks, you lose it. So I took a great risk. I told my mother, and my mother was a typical Jewish mother my mother used to go to the Jewish Care Centre. She was a volunteer, and she ran the reception centre. And this was the biggest reception center in Europe. So about 1,000 Jews came in every day, and my mother was at reception, and she was the worst possible Jewish mother in the sense that all she talked about was me and her grandchildren. I mean, to ad nauseam, literally. And so I took a risk, and she did manage to contain herself, and I took her and my wife and my oldest kid. We were allowed, my father had died by that time. We were allowed 3 guests. You go to Buckingham Palace and United. And I'm not meant to talk about it, but I will do. So the Queen, she does the thing with the sword, chops your ears off with the sword, and you get up and you have a conversation. And she's meant to be very well briefed. And during the course of the conversation, which was brief, she said, "Are you still involved in the business?" And I said, "I think so, ma'am, unless you know something that I don't know, in which case I better get back to the office pretty quickly."
Did she laugh?
Yes. Anyway, I did have several interactions later on. I remember Phil Lader, who was our chairman, who was the former ambassador to the UK, wonderful guy, a Democratic ambassador under the Clinton administration, super chairman. Yeah, the only better chairman I had was Hamish Maxwell, who was the chairman and CEO of Philip Morris, who was sensational. But Phil was great. And we had when he finished as ambassador, there was a dinner and he invited the Queen, and he stuck me next to the Queen.
Oh.
I was the CEO, and he stuck me next to the Queen. And I remember I think they decommissioned Britannia, the boat. And all they were left with at that time was the Royal Train. And there was this big discussion about the Royal Train.
Good for a dictator, not good for a queen.
And Prince Philip. I will tell you also stuff about Prince Philip, but I won't go into that. That was Prince Philip was an interesting character.
So it's not like an Effie paper, Adam. You can't write a submission to get
you
your
can.
knighthood.
Well, you can now.
No, you can't. It's interesting.
all
The
changed,
consultants,
yeah.
right, I had several people write to me and say, would I second their
nomination?
Their nomination. Oh, yeah. No, there's an honours committee, and there are people. I mean, I know somebody who has been on the honours committee for a number of years, and I mean, it's a quite extraordinary process. And then, of course, you get all these controversial lists. Rishi Sunak in his resignation list, or a decapitation list, gave knighthoods and peerages to all sorts of people. It gets controversial, but it was something, to be honest with you, I never really thought of.
I bet.
right.
It's extremely good for airline seats. Really good, very good.
Yeah, right.
Very good. But that's about it.
Very good. Well, so Martin, you've been amazing. Thank you for being so generous with your thinking.
A pleasure. It's been great fun.
Before we wrap up, one more question.
Sure.
If you were to write your creative philosophy on a black T-shirt, what would it be?
I think that phrase from Morris, actually, that nothing is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is where
not regulation and taxes.
No.
What about mush it all together?
No,
that's your
definitely
black-
not.
that's your black
nothing
T-shirt.
impossible. I mean, when you think about it, we started with a wire basket manufacturer. We've done the same thing with S4, but on a smaller scale.
What was S4?
S4 was it was a shell company. There was nothing really in it. It was just a cash shell.
Mm-hmm.
But, wire and plastic products was,
Yes.
which ironically, I mean, what an industry, right? There it is, up there in lights. WPP. What does that stand for?
Yeah. Wire and plastic products.
That's nice. That's really, I like that. The fact that you think it's almost a big piss take on the whole world, isn't it? WPP, it's great. It's good.
Whittle and P, as some people, the creative copywriters at Saatchi's used to call it. So I think nothing is impossible. I think that's really what it is, and nothing is impossible if you put your mind to it.
Including getting Sir Martin Sorrell on the Black T-shirts podcast, also known
I
possible.
wonder whether the listeners and the viewers really think that.
And just write the check, and we'll be done. All right,
$0.
Thank
$0.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, guys.
mate.
Thank you very
Good on
much. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, what did you think, Brent? What you expected?
No, not what I look. I don't know what I expected, but he was incredibly charming, incredibly personable. I could have listened to him talk for hours, right? I mean,
yeah, he was interpersonally, he was great, and obviously incredibly effective at managing huge boards and big conversations around the world, and very much more charming than his image would have portrayed. His approach to creativity blew me away, and I think
in what way? Like because
Yeah.
It's not what we traditionally call creative.
No.
thinking,
So
right?
normally the whole industry is obsessed with the big idea.
Mm.
And I think, if anything, he was kind of the opposite. I think he was obsessed almost with the little idea and getting down to solving geopolitical issues by looking at tax and regulation. I think is a good exemplar of that. But then if I think about all the things he's done,
But he's a big thinker, right?
yeah,
Like the way he could talk about, what's going on in the world and what's going on in business. Like he's a big thinker, but then his ideas to actually, how do we wrestle with this problem or how do we solve it? It starts with like smaller
detail.
things.
Starts with
that
detail
you can
and
execute, that you can.
That's right. Really practical, executional, detail-orientated things. And you think about where he's moved as well with Media Monks or the Monks and like personalisation at scale. He's getting right into the nitty-gritty and the factory or the distribution of content and proudly talking about how he's doing that as well. So I think that's by his own admission. So I think it's fascinating. It's really refreshing in a world obsessed with what's the big idea, to have somebody who's obsessed with how to get the little things right, how to practically change these things, how to actually practically solve problems. I reckon it was fantastic. Loved it.
Yeah.
I was really inspired by that. And I reckon he's on the verge of acquiring Thinkerbell. He just doesn't know it yet. And
and especially when you sold him on the idea of we mush things together.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really powerful pitch, Adam.
well, I think as well, the term mush and Sir Martin don't necessarily go. If I had said we grid things together, I think he would have been much more interested. But that whole parody of selling Thinkerbell just for my own peace of mind was just a joke to have the conversation.
Are you just clarifying that for your partners, partners who are listening, Adam?
I
Is
had
that-
no
is
idea.
that-
I
is
had
that-
no idea what I was doing, but I did that. So.
But the good news is that we can start the process right now for you to become Sir Adam.
Yes, exactly. And Sir Smart, I'll see you next week.
Goodbye and God bless.